So here I'm reading part of an article from 1896, and I think it's relevant to today. So it says the banker's idea of sustaining the national credit is to impoverish the people by low prices and high taxes. The old twin parties have adopted it. My note, I think it's more high prices and high taxes in today's world for the consumer, but for some critical things, it's low prices, which would put manufacturers, farmers, etc., out of business. So, anyway, are there any persons in this country who believe that if the president and secretary of the Treasury continue to buy gold from the London Jews and American bankers, ostensibly to sustain public credit, giving them a mortgage drawing interest for 30 years, and then giving them back the gold for nothing, that the country will not be bankrupt and her credit entirely ruined? So I think the author is being prophetic, right? Because how many times has our nation, I believe, declared bankruptcy, right? Wasn't it? I feel like I read it was around the time of the Federal Reserve Act, and then in the early 30s when FDR declared bankruptcy, right? So, and it's probably happened since then as well. So, anyway, continuing, the danger of national banks. What the country lost in its whole business operations by the Wall Street bank conspiracy may be stated with approximate accuracy. In the 8 months between April 27th, 1893, and January 1st of 1894, it has been diminished, as was shown by the clearinghouse exchanges, as compared with the immediate preceding period of 8 months, by more than 7,000 millions of dollars, and within 15 months after the 27th of April, 1893, by more than 10,000 millions. The dominant issue, the issue before the people in the presidential campaign of 1896 is Cleveland autocracy or gold plutocracy against the People's Party and Jeffersonian democracy. This is the dominant issue. The skirmishers in Congress are attempting by feints, such as an quote unquote emergency tariff. Well, that's relevant to today, right? uh, Such as an emergency tariff bill, a sham bond bill, a Monroe Doctrine scare, a Cuba belligerent declaration, sympathetic resolutions for Armenians, etc., to draw the people away from the financial question in which is involved all their distress and increasing debts and poverty. On this issue, there is no difference between the leaders of the old parties. They are working in harmony. They spar with each other on details, but entirely agree in principle. They are both in favor of selling bonds to Rothschild, both in favor of keeping silver demonetized, both in favor of the president and Carlyle violating a plain provision of law and paying gold in place of silver for demands on the treasury, and running the country deeper in debt to buy gold to give away to the English Shylocks, for their process amounts to giving it away. So the only live question before the public is the House of Rothschild against the American people and the United States Republic, with the John Sherman Republican Party and Cleveland Democrat Party on the Rothschild side against the People's Party, who stand against the English Rothschild Yellow Gold Party, as the old Continentals in their ragged regimentals stood up against King George's Redcoats. And real quick, my quote, I believe I read that even the author may be legitimate here, but even the Populist Party or whatever party he's talking about here that was for the people, I believe I read that August Belmont was involved and he was a Rothschild agent. And I feel I should have included it here, but I feel like he helped subvert that party. So I could be wrong. It could have been the 1892 election, but I feel like it was this one. So anyway, continuing. If you turn this question over and sift it to the bottom, you will find there is no other living, full-blown issue before the country today but the battle of the people to save their homes and liberties from this great Rothschild conspiracy. The national banks are all enlisted on the side of these London pawnbroker Jews. They have brought up the morning daily press of the country. They control the telegraph. They intimidate the railroad interests by controlling large amounts of their stocks and bonds. intimidate, or have in their employ the President and Secretary of the United States. And in Congress, such leaders as Sherman, Reed, Allison, Hill, Gray, and numerous lesser lights. These are held in leading strings by the Rothschild family by their power of gold or by influences behind which the gold power stands. This is the formidable army which the People's Party is facing and proposed to give battle as the old Continentals did in 1776. The People's Party are poor as their ancestors. The old Continentals, they have only their brave hearts and glorious cause to inspire them, while the enemy have all the wealth of the world to lean on for support, and a greed that never was and can be satisfied to inspire them. The People's Party calls upon the plain people to rally to their flag as they did in their homespun to the banners of Washington. They are being driven like cattle to the shambles, downhill to poverty and vassalage by the silk-hatted gentry of the Rothschild court. They must rally in their poverty as their ancestors did, who left their blood-stained tracks in the snow, and follow the leaders as they did who strike for liberty and life. Poverty and death mark the trail of the hosts of the Goldites. The Rothschilds are furnishing the sinews of war for the two old parties, planning their campaign and directing their movements. The enemy that has destroyed the American people for 30 years has been located. His headquarters are in the Bank of England, and the Rothschild dynasty of gold will soon place the two columns of their American army in the field, and one under Republican, the other under Democrat management, with chosen gold bug captains determined to crush the people as the bloodthirsty Spaniards are straining every nerve to crush the downtrodden Cubans. The New York National Bank President's Conspiracy Against Industry and Property is the title of a new book or brochure by J.W. Schmuckers, the private secretary to Salmon P. Chase, Secretary of the Treasury during the war. This work of Mr. Shuckers is a new gun added to the artillery of the reform forces in this Revolutionary War #2, a veritable rebellion against the British money power, as the old colonial rebellion was against the military tyranny of that grasping nation. The most effective machinery of the British money power, led on by the Rothschild Jews, are the New York national banks. In order to reach the people with their object lesson of suffering, country banks are ruthlessly crushed. Largely through the operation of the conspiracy above referred to, 714 national banks were closed during the first 8 months of 1893. 31 were closed during the first week in July, and 72 during July of that year. $400 million were withdrawn from circulation during June and July of 1893 to force this object lesson upon us. This panic closed the doors of more than 800 manufacturing establishments, at once throwing upon the charities of the public 467,000 workmen. I know, haven't we been reading about that in our country for years and years and years now? In our time? Nothing changes. So, anyway, continuing, it would require less effort for those bankers to produce a more disastrous panic in 1896 than in 1893 because of the fact that the country banks, manufacturers, and merchants are in a weaker condition. The author says in his preface, quote, my earnest desire now is, that the facts of this conspiracy shall be probed to the bottom, either by a commission of Congress or by the courts. It is not worthwhile to appeal to the New York courts. I do not know that it is worthwhile to appeal to Congress. What I do know is that if ever an investigation is had, it will develop an infamy that will appall the people and, as I hope, will move them to execute justice upon the national bank assassins who, in 1893, did so much evil. Unquote. This conspiracy against the people was concocted in Wall Street. The active agents in carrying it out was a score of lawless New York bank presidents, backed and assisted by the associated banks of that city, which, to save many of them from the storm of their own brewing, they found it necessary to issue, against law and justice, 70 millions of clearinghouse certificates, which they used among themselves as money. This little volume gives an harrowing detail the conspiracy which was carried on in preparation between the White House in Washington and the bank presidents in Wall Street, with John G. Carlyle as the active agent for the purpose of forcing the repeal of the Sherman Law and the suspension of silver coinage. The exposure of Mr. Shuckers of the most infamous money conspiracy in history that caused the panic and ruin in 1893 reveals a set of bank brigands with Cleveland as a collaborator whose ferocious cruelty would match any robber chief that ever lurked in the mountains of Spain or Italy. The history of this banker's conspiracy is simply astounding and should be read by every American citizen in order that they may be convinced of the lurking devil in their midst. This warfare of the national banks is as truly a war of conquest and for money and dominion as the wars carried on for 20 years by Bonaparte and more destructive of human life and property. So, yeah, it's interesting. Too bad more American people at the time period didn't pay heed to this book and to this news article and news articles like it, um, because obviously, uh, America was basically lost. Well, it was really lost during the Civil War, but by 1913, that was basically the end of any financial freedom for America with the institution of the Federal Reserve. And then by World War I and World War II, I mean, Americans were completely and utterly mentally enslaved. And they were deceived into going to war against their brothers and sisters in Europe twice, which is insane. And it shows how America was, like I said, already taken over by the Jews at that point by 1913. And really by 1865, they were taken over by the Jews. So from then on, America was not a great country. It was just used as the military apparatus to destroy the rest of the world by the Jews. Just as Britain was used before that, Rome was used, um, centuries earlier, and I'm sure plenty of other nations were used as well. So, just as I think China is being used or will be used now going forward. So, anyway, that's all I got here.